G'day everyone, welcome to the Outback Packers podcast, the podcast where two mates from all the way across the world have a yarn talking Packers football in the green and gold. I'm Nick Gregory, as always, joined by my co-host Iowa Joe, once again joined by the podfather himself, Jacob Westendorf. Jacob, it's really fantastic to have you back again. It's been too long and there's a lot that's happened to the team since we last talked, but how are you?
I'm doing well. Yeah, 3 months time is a lot can change. The last time we talked, the Packers were kind of making a push for the playoffs, and then that ended with one giant dud. But yeah, no, it's good to be back. It's good to be talking some draft with you guys, and thankfully, with all the drama and nonsense coming to a head this past week, we can. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. We can almost move on and start talking about the Jordan Love era Green Bay Packers and what are they going to do to build around him instead of the people that are exiting, or the person in this case that are leaving the team.
Well, now the question I've been putting up with everybody, and even though we know that a conclusion will be coming soon, what is your take on the Rodgers situation?
It was time to move on. I thought it was time to move on last year when they lost to the 49ers. I prefaced that by saying no team is going to trade the reigning league MVP. It has never happened in NFL history. I have yet to find it happening in any of the other three major sports, basketball, baseball, and hockey, that is, where the MVP is let go of, traded, whatever. It doesn't matter what you did, how you did it, whatever. And honestly, I think that Green Bay would have kept Rodgers had he played better and had the team been better this year. Gutekunst had a little nugget at either the combine or one of his media availabilities that he had recently, where it was basically the way our season unfolded changed the way we looked at some things. And I think the Packers still thought that they could compete for a championship last year. And then when they didn't, they kind of had the thought process that I have, which is 8-9 with an aging Aaron Rodgers. That's just a wasted year, 100%. And had they gone 8-9 with Jordan Love, that's at least some potential for progress, even if it is a step backward from where they have been in recent years. But it's time to move on. His conversation on Wednesday with Pat McAfee, there was no giant reveal. Before the interview started, I had tweeted something along the lines of this is what's going to happen. And we all know, we've known since, I'm trying to think, I think Gutekunst's media availability came after Bob McGinn's report from Go Long that basically said the Packers were done with Rodgers and they wanted to move on. Then Gutekunst basically gave a half-hearted support of him as much as he could. Rodgers wasn't speaking because he doesn't do that. He lets other people speak for him in the offseason and then complains that other people are speaking for him throughout the offseason. But that's beside the point. There was no big reveal. It was just he's going to tell us he's not playing and not playing for the Packers anymore. And that's just going to be that, and the details that he even gave is like when the interview started and he was like, well, back in 2020, they drafted my replacement. It's okay, so this is all just about Jordan Love. And like I said, Rodgers said that there were some things that were out of his control. And I think after he signed that extension, I would disagree with that. Had he played better, had the team been better in 2022, I think the Packers would have said, yeah, we want Aaron back. I don't think that the Packers had just decided that, hey, we're going to go to Jordan. Last year when they signed the extension, I think they thought there was a world that existed where Jordan Love never became the starting quarterback for the Packers. And had you asked me at this time last year, that's exactly what my take would have been, is I don't think Jordan Love was ever going to be the preferred starter for the Packers. Now he is, and it's the right move, even if I've been very upfront. I think it's the right move, and I don't believe in Jordan Love. Mm-hmm. I think the assumption that he's just going to be good is a lot of that is based in people my age and younger. Well, and people my age and younger that watch the Packers transition from Brett Favre to Aaron Rodgers and basically restart the whole process. I don't know if Jordan Love's any good. I wrote an article for Packer Report the other day that said the range of outcomes for this upcoming Packers season is so wide, because if he's terrible, tire fire, 3-14 and everybody gets fired, that's possible. I think that's at the lower end of possibilities. So is 12-5 if he's really good and having a chance to win the NFC, because the NFC is so wide open with the lack of quality quarterback play that we've seen. All the best quarterbacks in the NFL, and then after Rodgers gets traded, this will be even more true, are in the AFC. So To finish the point of what the question you asked is, it was time. It's been time. Love the player. When he said I'm arguably the greatest player in the history of the franchise, he was right. I do think it is arguable, but I would say it's Aaron Rodgers. And gave me a lot of joy for 15 years that he was a starting quarterback. But I will also say I'm not going to miss this stuff, eventually. And it's a price worth paying. But sometimes when your favorite team has a player like this, it's like rooting for a team with a superstar in the NBA. Most of the time, that comes with some extra baggage and everything that goes around it. And I'm kind of thankful that we're just going to be able to lie in the weeds a little bit for a little while, and hopefully it's a problem we have to have here again in 15 years when Jordan Love is awesome.
Well, now here's the question. Do you think the trade's being held up because the Jets want something wrote into the trade contract that in 2038, after Jordan Love has his Hall of Fame career, that he has to be traded to the Jets also?
That could be. That seems to be the way that things work, right? It's to almost 15 years, not to the day. It won't get to the day because Favre got traded in August, but 15 years later, all the eerie, spooky kind of similarities between, Jordan Love has his Aaron Rodgers in Dallas moment, except it's an NFC East opponent. Green Bay, I guess the biggest difference between the two is Green Bay was not as good as that 2007 team was. So I'd be curious to go back in time. And I remember how I felt about that situation, but I was 16 years old and worshiped at the altar of Brett Favre for the first 16 years of my life. So I am not necessarily the greatest source on what the majority's opinion is. I know there's that popular clip of the older gentleman saying Aaron Rodgers will take you to the toilet bowl and Brett Favre will take you to the Super Bowl or whatever. But I do wonder, I would guess the majority opinion was keep Favre because they were 13-3. They were a home game away from going to the Super Bowl, and Favre throws a dreadful interception, which seemed to be the ending of a lot of those movies for the Packers in the late, post 90s. But I would guess that the sentiment was, we got a Super Bowl team here. What do you mean you're trading Brett Favre? Like the sentiment now, I think, is, I think it's more split this year, but I do think a lot of us kind of understand, or at least myself even, because even in a world where I wouldn't have been quote unquote upset if they kept Aaron Rodgers, there is still a value in four-time MVP playing for your favorite team and having a chance to. Because for 2023, I do think Aaron Rodgers is the best chance for the Packers to win. I just don't know how high those chances are, which is part of the reason why it's time to do that. So I think it's a little more evenly split this time around. But, I don't have any data or anything like that. And I think the people that want to move on, like myself, it's not necessarily wanting to move on from Aaron Rodgers. I'm not celebrating Aaron Rodgers having to go play somewhere else either. It's just I'm celebrating the fact that I think they made the right decision. And it sucks that it's time to do this, but it is. That's just, if Tom Brady can play somewhere else, if Joe Montana can play somewhere else, the list goes on. Michael Jordan played for the Wizards. The list goes on.
Joe
Of all-time
Namath,
great players.
Johnny Unitas.
Yeah, there's a billion names. The reason the John Elway ending is so special is because it just doesn't happen that often. Everybody
Not
in a
anymore,
perfect
no.
world wants, and they want their last game to be played with the same team their entire life, win the championship, walk off.
Yep.
Just doesn't happen. It's not a thing. And that's why it is special.
Yeah, and I mean, you can just look at Twitter and see the division amongst fans about the situation. And I know your fellow Game on Wisconsin creator Eli Berkowitz, whichever one it is.
It's German. It's V.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. But you know how it is when it gets Americanized; they just screw it up.
Mm-hmm.
But he's been, and I understand it. He's fairly young, so he's grown up with Rodgers as his quarterback, and he's been defending him to this, to the minute. And I finally just said, hey, you got to realize this is the Packers' philosophy. At least the last two quarterbacks, you take a guy when it seems like that player's end is coming near. You let the guy sit on the bench for a while, and then finally it's time to cut the cord. And if they didn't follow that philosophy, we wouldn't have Aaron Rodgers right now, and we wouldn't. Who knows if we would be in this situation talking about it this time at this time? We could have been like the Bears and went through a carousel of quarterbacks. So they saw it work once. They're hoping it'll work again. I fully admit I wasn't happy with the Jordan Love pick, but it wasn't because they took a quarterback. It was because they took that quarterback because I wasn't really a Love fan,
Yep, neither was
and
I.
I understand why they did it, but it still wasn't something that I enjoyed seeing them do. So it is what it is. You
Well, and on
mentioned
that note,
the
Joe, I think there's a valid criticism to be had potentially of that. Because, like, here's the thing: if Jordan Love stinks, Brian Gutekunst is going to get fired, and every
yep.
piece of analysis that comes into that is going to be 100% valid. Maybe the quote unquote philosophy, maybe it needs to, I don't know about change, because I do think that a vast majority of the time, the Packer way, if you will, is pretty sound. But maybe there are some things like, when Adam Shine is on here ranting about how the Packers took a project quarterback when they were in the NFC Championship game, that's a valid criticism. And the only way to make it the only way to make that worth it is if Jordan Love is great. I don't mean good. Like, he can't be Jimmy G. He can't be Diet Kirk Cousins. Like, he's got to be really, really good for that to be worth it. And I know that's not fair necessarily to Jordan Love, but that's the situation that he's been put into. So I understand the idea of wanting to develop a quarterback. I understand that's how they got Aaron Rodgers. I understand thinking Rodgers was declining after that 2019 season, because I know they played for the NFC title, but he stunk in December and had like a good playoff game against Seattle and then wasn't very good against San Francisco. So I can understand thinking he's on the decline. But yeah, when you're 13-3, and like, for example, if the Cincinnati Bengals, who played in the Super Bowl last year and then this past season played in the AFC Championship game, if they take and this isn't the greatest example because they have Joe Burrow, but if they take a quarterback, there's valid criticism to be had there, right? Like, this was a guy that the Packers took and said, he is not going to help us in a perfect world for 2 or 3 years. And that is just a really uncommon way of thinking. And especially true when the draft is basically the only form where the Packers get significant contributors, because they're not high dollar shopping and free agency. They're not doing stuff like that, which is okay most of the time, I think. But if you're not going to add significant contributors that way, then yeah, there's criticism to be had when you take a quarterback coming off of an NFC Championship game appearance. But like you said, I don't care that they hurt Aaron Rodgers' feelings on that. I do. I guess the one thing, and Gutekunst has admitted this, is not in so many words, but if he could go back and do it again, he would tell Rodgers before the pick happened that, hey, this is what we're going to do, just so you're aware in front of things. I think they would change that. But otherwise, yeah, I'm in the same boat with you. Didn't like the prospect. So, but otherwise, like, Rodgers having hurt feelings about this, like, it's professional football, man, and you got your job the same exact way. So I don't have a ton of there's not a ton of tears being shed on my front for that. But there are some things that, yeah, I think the Packers could improve on philosophically. And I think there's a lot of people that think you have to pick one or the other. Like, there's Aaron's way or there's the Packers way. And it's just like, well, no, like, the Packers share some blame here too. It's the same reason Green Bay hasn't won a Super Bowl in 13 years. That's not just the Packers' fault. Like, Aaron Rodgers has some pie on the pie chart of blame here as to why he only won one championship in Green Bay. That's just how it is.
Right. And, I like I mentioned to somebody else, you got to kind of put the two situations together, because Ted Thompson put his career on the line by drafting, Aaron Rodgers where he did. So kind of in that same boat that Goody did. So I mean, yeah, he's taken a chance, and we can't sit here and say, "Oh yeah, we're going to get another 15 years of a Hall of Fame quarterback." We've been lucky. The Packers have been lucky with what they've done with when it comes to the quarterbacks. And I know we're going to be talking tight ends tonight, and we've got an upcoming episode that we'll be talking quarterbacks. but I could see them doing with Jordan what they did with Rodgers. If a guy starts falling this year into the second, third round, and we've got an extra second or third round pick, I could see them taking a guy. I don't know who it is at the moment, but just to throw a name out there, let's say the kid from Kentucky, Levis, is just free falling from the first round into the second or the third round. I could see them grabbing him and bringing him in as their backup quarterback and, grooming him. And then, hey, 2-3 years down the line, we don't need him, trade him for whatever we can get out of him. So, I mean, I see the situations going down the same way they went with Favre. And the thing that sucks about it is I know I sound like a broken record when I say this, and Nick's probably already tired of hearing it, and he can probably say it word for word by now. Rodgers has always said he didn't want to do what Favre did. And now basically we're going step by step everything Favre did minus the flip flop every year of the, well, I don't know if I want to play anymore. Oh well, yeah, I'm set to play kind of stuff. But everything else has been pretty much step for step what Favre did in his final few years in Green Bay. And it just makes me sad for that to happen. The other thing that I keep saying is I just want it done with. I'm glad we have a decision, but like you said, Jacob, it really wasn't a decision. We all knew what was going to happen anyway. He really didn't make any breaking news. I was hoping it would be, yeah, I'm going to the Jets, and the trade will be finalized in, 12 hours. But it didn't happen that way.
Shortly. Like, it's not going to take until June or whatever. This is going to get done. This
right.
is when, not if. And me, frankly, like sitting here as a Packer fan, I don't have to put any energy into this. Aaron can sit here until September for all I care if it means the Packers. Well, maybe not. That's not a great, maybe not September, but he can sit here for a while. I can wait till draft night if it means that means the Jets are going to pony up. My thing on that is the Packers now need to get the best deal for the Packers. And I'm sorry that the Jets have been as open about the fact that they want him as they have, but that's a whole separate topic. But yeah,
that's a whole.
Well, it's just funny to me.
Leverage.
People are like, I just want this to be over. I just want this to be done. I'm like, who cares? It's over. Like, Jordan Love's going to be the quarterback. There isn't a scenario where Aaron Rodgers is going to play quarterback in Green Bay. So from that standpoint, it's over. Like, there's nothing left to really discuss there. If you wanted it to be over because you wanted a decision made for who the quarterback is, that decision's made. It's just a matter of working out the trade comp now.
And see, that's the part that I want over is I just want the trade to be done so we can end the drama, move on. I know, Love is going to be you want to hear something weird? I knew we were going to be talking about the Rodgers stuff to start the show. And on my way home from work, I popped on, plugged in my phone into my headphone jack on the car stereo. And the first thing that popped onto my playlist was Meatloaf's I Will Do Anything for Love. So I just knew, we've got I mean, Love is in the air. I hate to be cliche like that, but he is the quarterback, whether anybody wants him to be or not. I just want the trade to be done so we can cut ties completely. Let Aaron go to the Jets, be the Jets quarterback, do whatever the hell he's going to do over there, whether it's go 9-8 or 3-14 or 17-0 for all I care, and let Jordan be Jordan and let the Packers be Packers. Now, Nick, you need to talk because I feel like me and Jacob have taken over the show.
No, I mean, yeah, I feel the exact same way that you guys do, pretty much. I mean, and it's about the whole thing of just like having progress with the team because, like, yeah, you're not gonna really get anywhere different with Rodgers at the helm. Once again, you're not finding out any new information. You're not furthering your assessment of Jordan Love or the team really, and I'm still not fully sure how much Matt LaFleur was really like trapped by Rodgers. That whole thing that Rodgers was totally just ignoring Matt LaFleur's system because I think Matt LaFleur definitely had a decent amount of blame in the way the offense has been run and the problems with it the past 2 seasons. But I think there's something to be said about Jordan Love kind of just doing exactly what Matt LaFleur wants. I mean, he's not going to be calling plays from 10 years ago. I think like. I'm sure Jacob's already covered this with like Ross and the other guys as well on Pack a Day and Game On, but It's like if they do well, then cool, they have Love as their quarterback, and that's fine. That's the next step. They move on with him. And if he's shit, then they can just draft someone new next year. And hopefully, if they get a good pick, they can trade that up to get either Drake May or Caleb Williams in a perfect world. But it's kind of like the mediocrity is the absolute worst thing for any team in the league. It's always that kind of that limbo, the no man's land that no one ever wants to be in, and that's exactly where we are right now. So, if any way to kind of get us on either side of that fence is a good move.
Cade McNamara is going to blow up, go into the draft, and be taken number 1 overall next year.
Sure.
No.
Sure.
But...
No, I just got to throw that at Jacob. But what do you say we take a listen to the words from the man that we're talking about himself on playing for the Jets?
I made it clear that my intention was to play, and my intention was to play for the New York Jets.
Okay.
And I haven't been holding anything up at this point. It's been compensation that the Packers are trying to get for me and kind of digging their heels in. So I would just, I think it is interesting at this point to step back and look at the whole picture. My side, love and appreciation, gratitude for everything that Green Bay has done for me. So much love and gratitude and just heart open for the Packer fans and what it's meant to be their quarterback. And also the reality of the situation, it is what it is. The Packers would like to move on. They've let me know that in so many words. They've let other people know that in direct words.
Now, I don't know about you, but it sounds, and I know Rodgers has been a guy who has talked about how he loves Green Bay, how he loves the culture, how he loves the fans and stuff like that. But throughout that comment or that quote, it sounded like he was trying to save face because, it's all on the Packers. The Packers want to move on. The Packers are holding up the trade. The Packers are doing this, but I love the fans and I love the culture and I love all that stuff. So what do you guys take from that quote?
Yeah, I think, I don't know if save face is the right terminology, but he's definitely trying to control the narrative. If we had talked a couple weeks, 6 weeks ago or so, we'd be saying like, it really seems like both of these sides want to move on from each other. They just don't want to be the first person to say it. And I think that's part of the deal with what Rodgers is saying. The whole deal about the Packers digging their heels in or whatever, I think he just wants to make sure this deal gets done so he's not still sitting in limbo in July and, hey, what are you going to do to send me over there? And I don't think the Packers want that either. I know we've talked a little bit this week on twitter.com about who has leverage and how can this happen or whatever. But realistically, the Packers don't want to say hey, we'll just let Aaron retire. They don't, that's really bad optics if they basically force the greatest player in the history of their franchise to retire. And I know from a business standpoint, the businessmen in my mentions are going to be like, no, forget him. He's an asset. Get what they want, or you can go sit over there. Nobody made you sign that contract. It's well, no, but it just doesn't work that way. But from the Jets standpoint too, it's just the Packers aren't giving him away and they shouldn't. The way I pose this question, if I told you guys next year we get one guaranteed year of Patrick Mahomes, would you trade pick one guaranteed year? That's it. Would you trade pick number 15 for him? The answer is yes, without blinking. He's Patrick Mahomes. It's MVP quarterback. And Aaron Rodgers has MVP quarterback upside, especially with that roster and the ability that they have to potentially get to a Super Bowl. I don't think they're contenders with him necessarily, but they're not able to go back to Zach Wilson or anything like that. But to get back to the original point, I think that Rodgers wants to control the narrative. And that's why, he talked about, I came out of the darkness and something changed. Sorry, Aaron, that's not true.
No, and I didn't even clip that, but he said it later on in the thing, or maybe even earlier on, where there was talk about it after the beginning of the the end of the season, where there were already rumblings going and stuff like that. Well, that tells me right there you knew that they were looking to move on.
Oh, it's not even that. His direct words in an interview he had with Pat McAfee on January 31st, before the Darkness Retreat, before the Super Bowl, where he was asked a question about the Jets and other teams calling about his availability and the Packers potentially discussing that. And he called them interesting trade discussions. And that's what they were related to, was him. So he knew, but he's trying to control the narrative of they told me they wanted me. And then I went into the, like, because realistically, if this is true, it sounds bad, right? They said they wanted me. I went into the darkness. I was gone. Couldn't answer anything. And then they changed their minds. Like, that objectively is bad if that's the way that it went, but it's not. And like, the problem with Rodgers is, as he's tried to control a narrative, there's a few lines that he's either stretched the truth, exaggerated, lied, whatever phrase you want to use for that. And since you did, like, you kind of caught yourself in your own web of nonsense. But since we live in a narrative-based world, it's hard to catch that. Like, I mean, I shared that article where it said he said that. Those are his direct words. And, you know, one of the biggest things that Rodgers fan base and Legion just throws at you is nobody knows anything unless he says it. Well, cool. He said that. So is it just that, like, it only matters if he says the thing that you agree with? Like, I don't understand, but it is what it is. Like, Rodgers, you know, this will be something that we complain about and we're not happy about. And he'll take another passive aggressive shot here or there throughout the rest of his career. And that's fine. He clearly has a problem with Brian Gutekunst and the way the Packers do things. And I really do. I think that just boils down to the fact that they drafted my replacement. And I don't know that he ever thought that bell would toll for him with the way that he's played throughout his career. But that's what happened, is eventually they drafted his replacement. And then they went to his replacement, which is the same exact way he got his job. And with all due respect to Aaron Rodgers, Aaron is the greatest player in the history of this franchise, like I mentioned, in my opinion. In terms of impact on the franchise, Brett Favre is far and away more impactful to what this franchise looks like now throughout his career. And they kind of sent him out unceremoniously. Like, they didn't do the whole, oh, we love him, we want Brett forever. It was like, I can still remember Mike McCarthy, the train has left the station. Like, damn. So you're just throwing this dude out on a, like, franchise icon, just not beat it. You're gone. Done. Whatever. I mean, this will all go away in 2 or 3 years. He'll come back. Like Mark Murphy said, they'll retire his number. They'll do this, do that. Maybe it'll take a little longer. Maybe they'll wait for Gutekunst to not be around anymore. Which, again, that was another thing. Rodgers, when he talked about the front office, and he was basically like, all my allies were gone. Well, Goody's been with the Packers since 1998. So,
Well, since you brought it up, let's listen to that clip real quick.
None of those guys are, who were there other than Sam Seo, who was the West Coast scout.
It's kind of funny that I brought this up earlier, but, and with you saying what you just said about it, he's with Favre was mad at Thompson. Favre was mad at McCarthy. Now we're 15 years later, Rodgers is mad at Gutekunst. Rodgers claims he's not mad with LaFleur, but
never mentioned his name. Did not mention his name. So I wonder, is there some, because the McGinn report is that Murphy, LaFleur, Gutekunst were in lockstep. It's time to move on. Which in past years, you've read reporting that LaFleur was like Rodgers' biggest advocate. And I don't have any insider info on this or anything like that. I just wondered.
You're the head honcho.
No, come on. I just wondered, does Rodgers feel like some sort of betrayal with LaFleur maybe the answer to that question is who cares? Like, and maybe that is the answer, but I would be curious to know, like, the guy who's been in your corner during these disputes and kind of was instrumental, per his words, to get him back in 2021 and then for last season even as well, said he didn't want you anymore. Like, what does that feel like? I'm sure that's not a good feeling, but it is an interesting dynamic, like you mentioned, because Brett and Ted, they never really mended fences. Ted, RIP, not the greatest communicator. And I get it.
Yeah.
It's tough when, and thankfully I've never been in this position, but I imagine when they, if work were to hire my replacement tomorrow, like, it's like the old Andrew Brandt story that he used to tell us. Brandt used to get it on both sides of the coin, where he'd be like Favre's agent and everybody would be like, do you know what it's like to come to work every day where your replacement's just sitting there? That can't be any fun. And then the replacement, in this case, Jordan Love, or in that case, it would have been Aaron Rodgers. And it's like, are they ever going to play? Like, if they're not going to play, can you get rid of them? Can we get them somewhere that they can play? Like, because this guy's ready. And that was the thing with Jordan Love is had they kept Rodgers around, they're like, oh, Jordan will request a trade. And I was like, well, the Packers might just tell him no. But at the same time, it's like, you're going to glue this dude to the bench for 4 years. Like this was an inflection point. At some point they were going to have to choose one of the quarterbacks. They took the younger one. And like we mentioned at the top, I think that's the right decision based on a lot of different things. Rodgers' potential declining play and the state of the roster. Nick, you talked about it a little bit on if Love stinks, then they can draft a new guy. If he's good, then cool. And the other part of this is if Rodgers had come back, and for the people, this was like the question I couldn't get a good answer on from the people that, or an answer that I deemed to be a good one from the people that wanted Aaron back was, what about the way that the Packers, number one, are even able from a salary cap, draft capital, trade asset standpoint, just what they have, like what are they going to be able to do with those things to make this team a championship roster from this year to next year? I listen to Shine most mornings and he'd be like, oh, bring Aaron back, get some receiver help. Boom. I'm like, what makes you guys think that this Packers team is one dynamic receiver away from playing for a championship? Like, I just don't understand that thought process. And then now I do that with the caveat of, with the way Green Bay normally does things, what makes you think they can go from 8-9 to champion? Like, I know the Eagles were 9-8 last year, but they added A.J. Brown and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, and you've seen all those additions that they made. And Jalen Hurts was an ascending player that went from, do we really know about this guy, to MVP candidate. Like, Aaron Rodgers would need to go from, is he declining, to MVP candidate. Aaron's going to be 40. Jalen's in his early 20s, mid-20s. So that's an easier thing to make. I don't know how. The only real argument that I think you can make from bringing Rodgers back would have been you wanted him to retire a Packer. And I completely understand that thought process, but I personally do not see how this team was winning a championship in 2023, 2024 anyways. So if that's the case, get the young guy and try and open that next little window.
Nick, why don't you go ahead and take final word, and then we probably should put this one to bed for the night and move on to what our actual topic is going to be after all our blood pressures are high.
We'll call it a warm up for the episode. Got to get ready. Look, I'm ready to move on. Let's do it. Tight ends. So it's basically
Nick is like Brian Gutekunst, and that was the Aaron Rodgers discussion. He is ready to move on. I love it.
I'm just like, I'm out. I'm just cutting it. I'm cutting it straight. Not even trading it. Yeah. So tight ends. I mean, it's a barren wasteland out there. I mean, guys, we have Tyler Davis, Josiah DeGuara, who's not even really a full-time tight end. I kind of read a few reports that Gutekunst's kind of keen to get him like more snaps and more involved in the offense this year. And they're kind of still high on him in the front office apparently. But I mean, look, you got two guys and like that's really it. I mean, Mercedes Lewis, we still have no idea what's going to happen with that. I mean, in all likelihood, he's either going to follow Aaron or retire. Our guy, Big Bob Tunyon, to sign with the Bears, and I'm not happy about that, but I'm not too torn up. I mean, he's clearly pretty far cry away from that 2020 season where he led the league in touchdowns for tight ends. But I mean, do we feel as though this is a free agent market that the Packers want to attack? Because I feel this is like one of the only kind of positions that they really might have to, because otherwise you're going to be looking at drafting like 2 minimum to up to 3 tight ends in this draft. And that's like, along with like safety and, O-line and D-line and receiver, that's like a lot to really try and fit in there.
Yeah, I think they should draft a couple guys at tight end regardless of what they do on the free agent market. It just takes so long for tight ends to get to be able to develop because it's such a difficult position to play. So I do think that there's, I think the Packers are sniffing around a bargain type free agent. If they can find one, that's the other part of it is, so I know Andy Herman had mentioned on a video once upon a time that like Mike Gesicki was somebody that the Packers could potentially be involved in, and that was just him thinking about it. But like if they had a bargain type contract and then he got about $9 million, and we'll see what that contract really looks like once you get the bones of it. But, if Dalton Schultz is going to just sit out there, if he peed in somebody's Cheerios before he went into the free agent market, and that's how that works. That's one of those gambles that I think is worth taking for Green Bay. And you can do that without sacrificing the thought that, yeah, they need to draft one early. I think they need to draft one early and draft one late. In a perfect world, and we'll kind of talk about this a little bit once we get into the prospects, like I want them to draft a guy who, Michael Mayer, Sam Laporta, Dalton Kincaid, whatever, a guy who can be a weapon in the passing game. And then later they find one of those role playing. You're not going to find a guy to replace Mercedes Lewis. Mercedes Lewis is one of the best blocking tight ends. It's still in the NFL, but that role is what I mean. Yeah, maybe I don't know long enough back on blockers in terms of tight ends go, but yeah, that's certainly possible. But find a guy later that can do some stuff like that too. And they might have to even look at a potential third guy to try and replace and this might be a fullback. This might be a tight end that plays like the H-back type roles, guys like Josh Weil, some dudes like that.
Yeah.
That could potentially play that role that, oddly enough, Josh Weil went to Cincinnati too. But the guys that play that role that Josiah DeGuara plays, because DeGuara is entering a contract year. Well, what do that's something else to look at when you look at what could Green Bay target in the draft is like, well, A.J. Dillon, contract year. Josiah DeGuara, contract year. John Runyon Jr., contract year. That's another potential. I mean, the Packers have like 800 offensive linemen, so maybe they don't feel like the need to take one of those for something like that. But still, I think what was the term you used, Nick? Barren wasteland. I think this is the weakest position on the roster right now, other than maybe safety. And the only reason I would say safety is because there's nobody there. And I would still even lean towards tight end because, like, if worse came to worse, absolute worst, they signed Tavarius Moore. They have Rudy Ford. Both of those guys are probably better as special teamers, but they could kind of do that. And like, they could still throw Darnell Savage back there, and you've at least seen him do well in that role in the past. Packers don't have anybody at tight end right now that you're just like, oh, he's been productive before. It's like, oh, it's Tyler Davis, who's a special teamer, and Josiah DeGuara, I think he's scored one touchdown in his career. And it was a nice little play in Minnesota in 2022-21, but there's just nothing there. They need an influx of talent. This is the byproduct of whiffing on the Jay Sternberger pick, Robert Tonyan getting injured, which is unfortunate. I would wonder, what does his Packers career look like if he doesn't blow his ACL in Arizona? I know he wasn't having the greatest season up to that point anyways, but it's still, he was still a useful player. And last year, man, by the end of the year, it just looked like a guy who was running in quicksand. And, he's got some positives to him. He catches everything thrown to him, and that certainly has value. But I'm with you. I'm not too torn up about that. I'd bring back Mercedes, see if you could find a bargain free agent, draft two guys, and let them develop. Like, that's the way I would do it. And it would be kind of funny if they still kept Mercedes Lewis just because he's on that list of demands, even though Rodgers says it doesn't exist.
Well, they weren't demands. They were just a wish list.
I call it whatever. I mean, I don't think that it was like, hey, if you're not going to get these dudes, I'm not coming. But, like, it's going to be like when they signed Randall Cobb in New Jersey, that's not something they would have normally done, And they say that they would have signed Lazard independent of who the quarterback was. Maybe. I think Lazard's a nice player, but come on, man. No way.
Yeah.
So that's what I would do. I would find a couple bargain free agents if they can. And that's the nice part about if once this Rodgers thing is done, I think it's still even feasibly do it now. With each passing day, these free agents get cheaper. One of the things about NFL free agency is it's so much fun during that legal tampering period because it happens so fast. But then the league year opens and it's just like, it's over. There's nothing left. Not nothing, but it's not as much activity, everything like that. Like the Packers hosted a visit with Tarvarius Moore and then signed him a day later. But like, that's the style of player that's getting signed out. Guys to help on special teams, bargain bin type free agents, which the Packers, that's the type of pool that they have to play in.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to be able, and they probably shouldn't be willing even at this point to play in the deep end of the pool when it comes to free agents and stuff like that. So find a couple of them bargains, draft a couple guys, and let's party.
And DeGuara had 2 touchdowns.
Oh, really?
Right.
Okay, so he had the one in Minnesota. What's the other one, I wonder?
The other one, if I remember right, is the one in Detroit in the last game where Jordan hit him on a screen, and
That's right.
He looked like a speed demon. I'll give him that. But
He's
Yeah,
of
and the
the
thing.
last years, he's had the most wiggle, but like that's not saying a whole lot either.
Yeah, I mean, he's still suffering from that third round curse. I mean, had he been taken in the second or fourth round, maybe he'd be a better player. But he's got that third round stigma on him. But yeah, I can't. I mean, I have to agree with you on everything you pretty much said. There's guys out in free agency I would have loved to pick up. Gaiseki would have been a even though he doesn't really fit the mold of what LaFleur would probably want in his system because he's not a blocker. He's just a really big receiver. Schultz would be another one. What do you got on your list here, Nick? Oh, Foster Moreau. I loved Foster Moreau coming out of the draft. I think he would be a solid guy to pick up, but it's all going to depend on what money he's going to be wanting and stuff like that. But I think they're the way Goody has been doing things when it comes to the needs of the team is he usually doubles down. He picks up a guy from free agency and then he takes a couple of them in the draft. So maybe, we're already seeing the safety side of things. They brought back Rudy Ford. They brought in Ward, it, or whatever his name was. I blank completely on it. Tavarius.
Total high dollar free agent signing.
But I mean, seeing them actually bring in depth pieces there, they're going to at least take one in the draft depending on what happens. So I could see that happening here that they re-sign Tyler Davis. They'll probably bring in some other guy, hopefully maybe a Foster Moreau on a prove-it deal. And then they'll take one or two of them in the draft. So right now, with all the cap hell, the draft is going to be the way they go, unless they get something from New York with the Rodgers trade. And I'm not really sure if they have anybody the Packers would want to take the contract on from
Jeremy
the
Yeah.
Jets.
Ruckert, if they wanted to do tight end.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, I like Rocket as a trade option. His whole thing was like he was a really good blocker coming out, and that would definitely really be useful. That's kind of one of the guys that I thought might get traded. I mean, I'd prefer him over like Denzel Mims, right?
Or
And I've heard
even
Conklin's
Corey
name thrown around a
Davis.
little bit too.
They already restructured Conklin's contract, so I got a hard time thinking that they'll do that. Like Ruckert would be fine. You just got to wash the stink of him being a Buckeye off of him. But
Yeah, that's a horrid stink.
Yeah. Do you guys want to get into these prospects now?
Let's do it.
Let's do
Let's
it.
go for it.
This is a really funny class. I mean, I think Jacob's probably gotten sick of me like just tagging him or just like mentioning about how much you don't like RAS, but this is a
Time out. No. I have no problem. I have no problem with the tool. I have no problem with the use of it. The Green Bay Packers have no idea what that is. That is the only problem I have with it.
No, for sure.
That is the only problem I have with it is when people talk about it, like Brian Gutekunst sits there with his board. Like there are people on that app that think like would have you believe that the Packers just sit there and go, okay, here are the names of the players and they're alphabetized. And now let's order them based on Kent Platt's website. And these are the players we like the most. Like there's no way that the Packers do that.
No.
But it is a useful tool. And the Packers, obviously they value athleticism. They should. Like the best players are usually the best athletes. But yeah, it is funny to me. Some of these people treat Kent Platt's website like it's their child because you say that Gutekunst doesn't know what it is. It's an interesting dynamic to me. That's all.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm just pulling your leg, but it's funny because this is the Packers I think have the highest correlation between the RAS score and like likelihood of being drafted. But tight end is a position where they just do not draft athletes. It's really fucking weird and it's so inexplicable. Jay Sternberger was a horrible athlete. Not horrible, but average athlete. By NFL standards, a pretty average athlete. And the guys that they have on the roster, Josiah DeGuara, Tyler Davis, I mean, even Robert Tonyan, not really great athletes. I mean, Mercedes Lewis was a fantastic tester when he was drafted, but that was almost 20 years ago now. And this class has so many really, really athletic guys. I mean, I think all of them except two, at least the guys that I looked at, have over 8.0 RAS score, and a lot of them have in the high nines. Zach Kuntz, who we'll talk about later on, scored a 10, which is that means he has the record. Yeah, and it's just crazy because it's kind of the year where they're going to be forced to draft an athlete just by pure chance. I mean, I'm really excited about a lot of these guys. I think this is a fantastic tight end class. There's so many really good tight ends, so it's a good year to need them. And it's kind of a mixed variety bag. You have guys who are like receiver only, guys who are blocking only, and all kind of flavors in between. Like you mentioned, Jacob, the H-back types definitely in there. My guy kind of. Well, there's a few, but the guy that I think who is going to be really good in the league is probably Tucker Kraft. I just think he's only has he can only kind of go up. But I mean, speaking in the first round, I know I kind of briefly talked about this with you, Jacob. But is there any reason why what is the reason why you don't like Darnell Washington in the first round?
I don't like any of these guys in the first round. First of all,
okay.
Again, tight end, it's just one of those positions that takes so long to develop. I just don't think you get the bang for your buck on getting a guy in the first round. And none of these guys are, quote unquote generational prospect is the term that gets thrown around a bunch. That was Kyle Pitts the first 2 years of his, and this isn't their fault. It's just the nature of the position. TJ Hawkinson was allegedly a generational prospect. I didn't necessarily buy that at the time in terms of prospect, but he's been good, not great. And when you look around the league, great, there's like 3 tight ends that are great, and the rest of them are either like a mix of good, like Hawkinson is like good, for example. The 3 that are great are Kittle, Kelsey, and Mark Andrews, and after that, it's just a lot of dudes that are just fine. So I just think there's better ways to use that pick, and not only that, if you start making a big board. And I'll take the 4 quarterbacks out, obviously, because the Packers, I never say never, I guess, but I cannot picture a scenario where they pick one at 13 or 15 or, wherever they end up picking first in this year's class. But if you take those away, I just don't think you're going to get – it's the same conversation I was having earlier today about Jackson Smith and Jigba. I think he's a good player. I just don't think there's going to be – he's not going to be the best player available on the board. And this Packers team is not in a position where they can be like, oh, we're taking a luxury. Now, if they get a second first-round pick out of this whole Rodgers thing, I do believe that teams use their second first-round pick to take a luxury. You've seen the Packers do that in the past. Like Rashawn Gary was technically a quote-unquote luxury pick because they had the Smith brothers in town and everything like that. But to answer your question about Darnell Washington, it's not necessarily that I don't like him. I've got some friends that live out in the Vegas area and some guys that know him from going back to when he went into high school. And if you guys have noticed, there seems to be an unfortunate trend with some of these Georgia prospects in terms of character red flags. Right. Like, for example, last year, as everybody was falling in love with George Pickens, I was kind of saying some of the same things about Pickens that I am now about Washington. I was like, I don't think Green Bay is going to draft him. I know they did a ton of homework on him and decided that whatever his red flags were not worth their time. Now, granted, maybe if they hadn't traded up for Christian Watson, then that would have been different, but who knows? But I don't think George Pickens was on their board based on a few people that I've talked to, and also just kind of the stuff that went into his, and it's kind of the same with Darnell Washington. And like you said, Jalen Carter has some red flags. Mm-hmm. Devontae Wyatt last year had some red flags.
Quay as well.
The other guy? Broderick Jones, Quay, I don't remember if Quay had the character red flags. I know he had some off-field, like, who was it? Somebody shared his Wonderlic score was like 7, if you think that matters or something like that. But I don't think that was the deal. But yeah, with Darnell Washington, it's more so that I've heard the conversation around him is very similar to maybe not the best football IQ. And granted, I can't corroborate this stuff. I don't know this. I wasn't in the interview rooms, anything like that. So I'm not trying to say I know this for a fact. But I've heard those conversations, and I've heard on a character side of thing, he may not fit the Packers mold of what they typically value in the person. But I didn't think Devontae Wyatt fit that either based on his very public domestic dispute. So maybe that'll be wrong. I don't know. I've got Washington as my 4th rated tight end. So he's one of those guys that, if Green Bay takes him, I think that would be awesome. I just don't know if they – put it this way. From what I've gathered, the Mercedes Lewis clone thing is true to a point on the field. Off of it, in the locker room, all that stuff, maybe not necessarily the best comparison.
Sure. Yeah. And yeah, I definitely remember hearing that about Darnell Washington really early in the process. I think this was like even kind of just off the tail of the Super Bowl. And I tried doing some research about it and I couldn't really find anything about the kind of character concerns, but I definitely have heard that from a few different people. Definitely something to think about.
I'm going to be honest, I didn't really watch a ton of Darnell Washington because I figured Nick would, because that's all I've been hearing out of Nick is that's who the Packers need to draft. I did watch a little bit of him today before we got on to record. I can see it. He's got the tools and all that. I mean, there are some things that he's got to work on the field. I know nothing about off the field because, like I said, I didn't do any research on the guy. I didn't do anything because I figured Nick could come on and he would just be all over it. But, I mean, there were a couple little things that I did notice with him that he would have to work on. There were a few times that in just the one game that I watched, he was missing blocks. Other times he was set, he was doing great, but there were the occasional where he would just plain whiff, and it usually got Stetson Bennett or the running back or whatever killed. So that would be something he'd have to clean up. The other thing that I loved, I liked, but it was just funny was when he ran, even though he's fast, he looked like he was lumbering. I don't know if you see those grainy films of the Yeti or Bigfoot running through the woods or whatever. That's all I could picture in my head because he just felt like he was lumbering down the field more than it was a smooth run. So, I mean, I can see it. Nick, what have I been telling you the whole time when you bring up a tight end in the first round? The same thing Jacob just told you, that, it's not a position that I I would like to see in the first round just because of the developmental. So, if he's there in the second, depending on what his off the field stuff is, go for it. But,
Yeah.
just in the first, I have a hard time seeing it with
Yeah.
anybody.
For me, the thing that really stood out to me with Darnell Washington, and obviously you saw it at the combine as well, is just the play strength, like the raw kind of like physicality of his game is like what really sticks out. As a blocking presence, I mean, it's not even close to anyone else in this class. He is by far the best blocker in this class. And that's kind of his calling card, right? That's his thing. But like you said, Joe, he's not really an easy mover. He's not like a natural athlete. And sure, he tested well, but he's not one of those guys that you really see that on the tape. I mean, he performed a lot better than people expected, to be honest. But I think the thing with Darnell Washington, also, being on the same team as Brock Bowers, I think he was overshadowed and kind of robbed of a lot of opportunities. I think he's one of those guys that he's only going to go up from here. I've mentioned this kind of a few times, but I really view him the same way I viewed Quay Walker kind of last year. It's like someone who was like behind some better players and has the physical tools and kind of is looking like projecting to become a better player in the NFL. And obviously, you're banking on improvement, not necessarily what you've seen out of him. But I do like have confidence. The Georgia pipeline. I think he will be good in the NFL, if not just as a blocker. But, for me, the guy who, regardless of athleticism and whatever, the guy who is the best tight end, full stop, in this class, I think it's pretty hard to look past Michael Mayer out of Notre Dame. Where are you guys at on Michael Mayer?
Tight end 1.
Mm-hmm.
The Green Bay draft guide, for those of you, if you want to have a chance to purchase that, check out my pin tweet. That is not I don't do the rankings individually. We kind of do them collectively. Michael Mayer did not end up number 1 on that list. Someone else did. And it wasn't who you might be thinking off the top of your head because it seems to be a consensus between the two. But I think Michael Mayer is the best tight end in the class. He has the best tape. He tested above average, which it's kind of what was expected. But nothing was disqualifying about his times or anything like that. I think there's going to be some helmet scouting that goes into this of, who's the last Notre Dame tight end to do anything? It's like, well, that doesn't matter at all, actually, to be honest with you, on some things. But yeah, I think he's the best tight end in the class. I think this is a case of prospect fatigue because we've been thinking about this dude since he was a freshman. And now that he's not, there's other guys. And there's other guys in this class that are really good. There are 2 others that I like quite a bit as well. Sam Laporta from Iowa, and Dalton Kincaid from Utah. Those are 2 guys also that I think very highly of. But I think Mayor's the best one. He's the best combination of blocker and pass catcher. I think he has the ability as an athlete to make plays after the ball is in his hands. He is a my ball mentality type of player. Like he'll go get the ball in the air and he's physical at the catch point. That's something that could help Green Bay's athleticism and red zone offense. He would be Green Bay's best athlete they've had at tight end. Any of these guys, frankly, is going to end up that way. But he would be the best athlete Green Bay's had at tight end since Jermichael. And like Jermichael Finley, unfortunately, had his career end 10 years ago. Like that is, it's beyond time to find one of these guys to help them. Like you mentioned, Nick, the Packers. I love Jace. I love Jace coming out.
Me
Been
too.
able to cultivate a bit of a relationship with him. He and I have talked a little bit sparingly here or there.
Right.
So I kind of know him a little bit. I wouldn't say we're friends or anything like that, but
Besties.
was really rooting for him. Yeah, was really rooting for him. It just didn't work out. And then DeGuara is another guy who just not an athlete at tight end. Has some value in this offense, obviously, but they just don't have that. So yeah, Mayor, tight end 1.
For
I
sure.
can go with it. Again, I'm probably, if any of them's going to get taken first round, it's probably going to be him. But
Daniel Jeremiah has Dalton Kincaid ranked as his 10th overall prospect, not tight end, overall. That is wild to me. So I think he'll be the first one taken.
It's quite interesting, right? Because I think, it's this whole like chasing after Travis Kelce thing. I view Dalton Kincaid as more like in line with like a Mike Gesicki, maybe not as bad of a blocker, but it's the receiving thing. I definitely see it, but yeah, I saw the Daniel Jeremiah thing, and it's just like Brett Coleman, for whatever it's worth, he thought that the Bears should draft him at number 9 overall. So yeah, I mean okay. I had the exact same reaction.
No. I think with Dalton, it's like he comes from a program in Utah where they kind of build their identity around toughness and physicality and stuff like that. So when it comes to Kincaid, I think the want to is going to be there. And with being a blocker, some of it really is, do you want to be in this guy's way or not? Or do you, with some other guys, it doesn't always work, as well. Like Mike Gesicki, you mentioned, no interest in blocking anybody.
Yeah.
And, maybe he wouldn't be that great of a blocker if he had interest in blocking people, but he just, he doesn't. Kincaid is somebody that I do think Green Bay will like, number 1. Number 2, I do think that's a guy that will at least have the desire to get better as a blocker, which is some of the battle at least. But yeah, I think that you're online there with saying there's some improvement to be made in that department, which is interesting because going into my study with Kincaid, I would have just assumed that he was a good blocker because of where he plays at school. I would have just assumed like, oh, Utah, they're not going to put a guy out there that's not going to get in the way physical or, in a physical standpoint, but he, not the greatest blocker. That's certainly true.
Yeah. And see, that's pretty much everything I had wrote down on him. I said he was quick off the line, not the best blocker. He was more of a wide receiver and a tight end body. He had the technique to block, but he didn't have the ability. You could see where he would go up and he'd want to put the block in, but, whether it was, not big enough, bulked enough, whether it was he just wasn't in the right position. He had the want to do it, but he didn't have the ability to do it. So I think that he could be somebody that they could work with and say, all right, maybe that's why they would bring, Big Dog back and say, all right, you go sit with Mercedes and you learn everything you can from that man. And I think he'd be the type of guy to do it. Gesicki from day one, I remember watching him, there was nothing in him that was going to be a blocker because he, like Jacob just said, he didn't want to do it. Penn State would force him into those situations, but you could tell he didn't want to do it. So, but yeah, Kincaid, I loved what I saw out of the kid. Out of all of them, I think Kincaid probably could go first, but Mayer is going to go in the first round. But I still stand by it that I have a hard time taking a tight end in the first round unless it's a sure thing like a Pitts or a Gronkowski or somebody like that.
Gronk didn't go until round 2. Pitts went in the top 5. I think we can look back pretty safely and say that was not the best use of that. I think that the Falcons should have taken Justin Fields when they took Kyle Pitts, but or
I
whoever
bet
their
they wish they
quarterback
could
was.
have now too.
Maybe not. There's probably just as much evidence Justin Fields stinks as there is that he's good. But that's
I'm
that's
not saying Fields is good, but they're in the kind of quarterback boat that the Jets are kind of in right now, where they don't have. I mean, you got Desmond Ridder, and you don't really know what you have in him per se.
They're a team that nobody's really talking about as much. They could take a quarterback at 8 if one's there.
Right.
If one of those 4 guys, I don't think that'll happen. I think 4 of the first 7 picks or something like that are going to end up being quarterbacks. But
yeah,
Atlanta's a team that could do that. But to finish your point on Kincaid, and it was interesting because we write our profiles and stuff for the draft guide, and then they ask what's your team fit for this player, and we're supposed to base that on draft trends and stuff like that. Well, if you base it on the way the Packers have typically drafted their tight ends, the answer would be low for most of it, because it's low, medium, or high. But with the way that their room is currently set up, I was basically for the first 12 or 13 guys, I was the need for this is, the team fit for this is high, because the Packers, you mentioned Dalton Kincaid, maybe he's just a bigger receiver, but Green Bay needs that too.
Yeah.
They need playmakers. They need playmakers regardless, running back, receiver, tight end, whatever. I think they need guys like that, and they need the, that all around type of tight. There are people that have suggested, and I would not do this, but a group of tight ends that if they took Mayer and Kincaid, for example, again, not advocating for this, but those two, their skill sets complement each other perfectly, because Mayer's more of that all around type of player, and Kincaid can be your big slot, stretch the seam type weapon as they develop kind of together. But again, wouldn't do that. But just that's the level that the Packers have in terms of need in that offense. They don't have enough talent, and they don't frankly have enough bodies. That's just how it is right now.
Yeah. So in that kind of second tier of tight end, I mean, speaking of receiving only tight ends, I think Luke Musgrave basically fits that to a T perfectly. He's pretty fast, pretty athletic, big tight end. He's kind of that big receiver guy. But I mean, I know both you guys are really big on Sam Laporta. I mean, tell me about him. What did you find when you watched him?
Yeah, Laporta to me, number one, and again, this isn't inside info. This has been reported by a bunch of people, but the Packers have gone to see the Hawkeyes play a bunch this past year, and that could have been for...
Who wouldn't want to go see the Hawkeyes play?
I've watched them play offense. That would put me to sleep most of the time, but no, I'm with Laporta. It's just, I think he's the third best tight end in this class. So my personal rankings is Mayer, Kincaid, Laporta. I have him above Washington. I have him. Luke Musgrave's not a guy that I'm very high on. The athletic upside is certainly there, and I will understand when a team picks him higher than maybe I think he should go. He's supposed to be this receiving weapon. He struggles with catching the ball. He doesn't make catches in contested situations. Yeah. And you could fix drops. I do believe that. I personally can't get on board with something like that I wouldn't pick him until the third or fourth round. Musgrave, that is. Sam Laporta, I've said I've been kind of championing the campaign of picking him at 45. And one of my favorite responses to that is always, oh, in this mock simulator, I have him available for the Packers' fourth round pick. It's well, cool. That doesn't mean anything. The last time I did a mock draft, I had CJ Stroud available at 15. That's not going to happen either. So, it's just a simulator.
I did one where I had Paris Johnson sitting at 22.
Right. It's just a game for all of us to play. That's all of that. If you just look at the simulator as a game, it's not meant to be predictive. But when we do these mock drafts, I can't sit here and say at pick 15, I picked Tyree Wilson. And then, at pick 45, I picked Michael Mayer. And it's adding as much realism to it as we can, but there's only so much that we can do. Anyways, the point I'm getting at, I just think he's a really good all-around player. And Joe, I don't mean this as disrespectful, but I think once he gets out of that elementary school nepotistic offense that the Hawkeyes run, I think that he's somebody that can absolutely flourish. He's a really good athlete, which I think that came as a surprise to some people, because you think Iowa, you think slow, bumbling Caucasian tight end. That's just the reality that we're in. I think people thought that, but then he tested really well. He's on a similar-ish level from an athletic standpoint as all the other guys we mentioned. He's a better athlete from a testing standpoint than Michael Mayer. We don't have testing numbers on Kincaid, but we assume he's a good athlete. He didn't test as well as like Darnell Washington, but Darnell Washington's also an alien from a size and a weight standpoint. So some of that is built into. That's when when we read these RAS spreadsheets, that's part of it that has to go into it too. Is like, oh, he
this
ran
guy's
this
from another planet.
right, and it's like, well, he's 6'7" and 270, so of course some of those, how much of the downgrading, if you will, in his athletic score is because of his size, for example, like he only weighs this or that or whatever. But that's how some of that works. But yeah, Laporta, good hands at the catch point. He's got an ability to make plays after the catch. He was Iowa's offense for I remember, and the last time, I watched him, not the last time, but I watched him play Michigan a couple times, once in the Big Ten championship. And like Iowa was changing quarterbacks in the Big Ten championship game. And it's like, that shouldn't happen, right? Like you're playing in a conference championship game. You shouldn't be benching your quarterback at halftime, but that's the level of quarterback situation that he's played with for the last 2 years. It's like from game to game, it could be a completely different dude in there. My good friend and Packer Report publisher, Ross Uglum, always called it shitty quarterback-itis. And it's a disease that you can suffer from in a lot of different places. Like Corey Davis, for example, as a receiver is one that he's championing, is like he suffered from that. He's never played with a good quarterback. Laporta's kind of the same way. I think he's somebody, get him in Matt LaFleur's offense. I think he fits like a glove. And I think if Jordan Love is anything at all, that Laporta could be a guy that I'm not going to put the George Kittle hat on him because that's not fair by any stretch of the imagination. But can he get into that? I mentioned there's that tiers of tight ends where it's like Kittle, Kelsey, Andrews, and then it's like good dudes, and then just like blech. Can he get into that tier of like, TJ Hawkinson, Dalton Schultz, players of that ilk? Sure. Yep. I think he absolutely can. And is that worth the 45th pick in this year's draft? I think it absolutely is. So I would pick him on day 2. And I think that's the best use of Green Bay's resources. If they come out of this with, I've always been saying, 13 and 15, I'm just assuming the Packers are getting a first round pick until I realize that they're not. 13 and 15, they can address that however they want. And then 45 tight end, Sam Laporta is the guy that's the most likely one to still be sitting there. And I think he will be the best use of that resource too.
Yeah.
Well, for those of our listeners that have been around for a while, they know that Jacob has visited us before. God, that's a hard word to say. Visited. He's been here before. We went back and I found the clip of it, and we actually talked about Laporta back in December. And here, this is kind of a little bit of a long one, but here's what we had to say.
And their tight end is going to be a Green Bay Packer by this time next year. So
I'm going to say he's going to go, and we can put this down as like Joe's prediction. He's going to go in the 5th round, just like George Kittle did. Because the big knock on him is, at least in my eyes from seeing week in, week out, is he's not consistent with his hands. And I think he'll go in and I think he'll tear up the combine just like Kittle did. But I still think he's going to fall to that mid-round range just because they're going to question his. And other than, obviously the draft hasn't happened as of yet, but, I did kind of change it from 5th round to mid-round, so 2 through 4, 2 through 5. But, I said it. He was going to come back and tear up the combine, and, now we're talking maybe 2nd round for him. So I love the kid, obviously, being the Hawkeye homer that I am. I will always question his hands. Now, whether that's quarterback play, whether that's, whatever. There were times that the ball would hit him like right in the hands and it was a drop. So who knows what it was? You can call it shitty quarterback-itis, but when you've got an offensive line coach being your quarterback coach, there's a little bit of an issue there. And not only is he out of position coaching a position he shouldn't be coaching, he's the head coach's kid, and yeah, that could be a whole nother podcast. So, but yeah, I love Laporta. He's got good speed. He's got the route. He's a blocker, but he's his blocking. I kind of put like Noah Fant. They can do it, but they're not the greatest at it. So, but again, that can be another thing that he can work on. and get fixed. But yeah, I
See, I
hate
loved Fant coming out, and I think Laporta's a better blocker than he is.
he is.
Or
He's a better
was.
blocker than Fant is, but he's still not like a George Kittle type blocker where he's going to put his guy to the ground. He's going to be the guy in the way that's going to force him to readjust and all that. But I always attack people when they show, oh, well, Sam Laporta in the third round. Don't put that third round curse on Sam Laporta, guys. That's
have we talked about my third round rule? Did we do that?
I've made up a third round rule a long time ago. I said all third round picks must be traded.
I have it as
until eternity.
Yep, traded for veterans at the trade deadline, traded up for in prior rounds. So you use the first and the third to move up, for example, in the first round, or running backs. Because running backs, it's just a hard position to not pan out at. So pick a running back, and if they are anything at all, then that is just got to try something different. I don't know what they're doing. I don't know how they approach it. It's not. I don't know if it can be a systemic issue. Just like, we're talking. Who's the last third round pick for the Packers that was any good? Is it Morgan Burnett?
Yep, it's been almost 12, 13 years.
I would say Richard Rodgers has like an iconic play in franchise history, but he wasn't like he was good enough.
I think I could have outran that guy.
Yeah, he had a nice little career in the NFL. He's stuck around for a while. I think as of last year, he's a free agent.
Yeah, he's free agent.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I thought he was on the Eagles practice squad for a little while, but that might have been in 2021.
That was a couple of years ago. I think the last team he was with was the Chargers, and that might have been a practice squad spot.
Good for him. Carved out a nice career, but yeah, the Packers, it's been brutal. So yeah, don't put the third round stigma on him. And frankly, like, I don't like being they're not going to be their guy, but I don't think he would be available at that selection because I think he's too good of a player. And from what I've gathered from reading on the guys that know more than I do is that early day two, that's going to be like, remember last year when some of the receivers started like, and Green Bay participated by trading up for Watson that way, but then you had these receivers just kind of have that run and they flew off the board. That was like the sweet spot for those things. Well, I think the sweet spot this year for a lot of the tight ends, like I will not be surprised at all if pick 33, or it would be 32 this year because it's the Steelers. God bless the Bears for saving us from ourselves on that one. But like if that, well, maybe not there because they have Freiermuth, but one of them early picks becomes one of the first couple picks of the second round becomes Michael Mayer or Sam Laporta or Luke Musgrave or even Dalton Kincaid if he's available. Like I would not be surprised if that's how, in the first 8 to 10 picks of the second round, you just see 3 or 4 tight ends go just like that.
Yeah.
Tucker Kraft is another guy you mentioned who, man, that would be an interesting one. Not to helmet scout or anything like that, but the last guy that came out of South Dakota State was
by this time next year. So,
oops, sorry.
Hi me. That was nice. That's okay.
Hey, it's a new soundboard. I'm still getting used to it.
Hey man, I completely understand. But getting him in the fold for that is, the last, like I mentioned, the last guy that came out of there, that would have been Dallas Goedert, and he is in that. He is like probably a notch just below like Mark Andrews and some of that stuff. So I'm trying to grab some of the stuff that they wrote, that we all wrote on him for the draft guide. So I have that here. He's ranked as their fifth, our fifth tight end in this class. And it's still funny. He was a 0-star running back coming into like that. So
really,
that's interesting. But yeah, he plays in line. He's able to use his strength and everything like that. He's got some things to work on in terms of like getting in and out of his breaks as far as his route running goes. But some of that, and I'm not saying that like, it's just a different level of football that he's played on. So like he's able to kind of athlete his way over some of the guys that he's been able to play. Obviously not going to be able to do that in the NFL. But the comp that they gave him for this, here's a little preview for you guys, and go ahead and buy that draft guide so you can get more stuff like this. But the player comp that they gave him.
Where can you find that draft guide?
You can find it. It's my pinned tweet on Twitter. So at Jacob Westendorf, you can go there and grab a draft guide for $8.99. We're doing pre-orders until early April. It's a digital book, so it goes right to your email, everything like that. But the player comp for Kraft was Dawson Knox. So if you like the athleticism and everything that Knox brings the Bills, then I think you'll like Kraft for the Packers. And that's another guy who I do know that Green Bay really liked Dallas Goedert. But if memory serves, I don't remember if Goddard went before or if they just had Josh Jackson fall into their lap. So they decided they couldn't not pick Josh Jackson, which that didn't work out. But I don't know a whole lot of people that are blaming the Packers for the way that worked out. So I'll have to look that up while somebody else is talking just to figure that out. But I do know they really liked Goddard. And again, that doesn't mean these two things go together necessarily, but I think that the Packers, this is another guy who, again, has that athleticism. They did really well last year picking an athletic freak from the FCS level of football. Christian Watson is going to be Green Bay's number one receiver going into 2023. Mm-hmm. So that could be another guy that, again, I'm telling you guys, day two is where, if it all works out in a perfect world, Green Bay is going to have, in my mind, 2 second-round picks, one for one that they already have, and then one I'm hoping somebody signs Yosh Nijman. And is able to kind of use that. That's a completely different philosophical conversation that we can have if you guys ever want to go into that. But if they have those 2 picks, then I think that could be where even Green Bay could even feasibly grab 2 tight ends in the second round. My thought has been grab a guy in the second round, and then whatever pick you get for Yosh, draft his replacement. Just because I don't think Nyman's worth the contract that he's going and deservedly command. I shouldn't say worth that, but I don't think that that's a best use of Green Bay's resource moving forward. And if you're not going to pay him, then they should but if somebody wants to sign him, get that second round pick, find his replacement, and you turn an undrafted free agent into a second round pick. That is incredible bang for your buck on that side of things. But yeah, I think Kraft is another guy. There's a few guys that they could add on day 2, and he's certainly one of them.
Yeah, I think he's one of the only guys in this class that I think has like that kind of high ceiling that I think, theoretically could become one of those top tier guys. He has the athleticism to do it. And yeah, like you said, like the route running and stuff like that definitely needs work. But, it's like those are like at least workable skills. And like you said, the product of just where he was playing. Yeah, some of the other guys that I like in the later round. I mean, obviously we have Zach Kuntz, the 10 RAS guy, infamous 10 RAS guy. He's massive as well. I think he's like 242, 6'8", 6'7". But yeah, he's like, I think he's another one of those players. Again, obviously, really a lot of potential. Let me find my notes here. He's one of the more versatile tight ends. A lot of these guys end up kind of either in line or as like, the big receiver or whatever. And that's kind of like their role. But I did notice that he moved around quite a bit. And I think he has a good feel for zone coverage and things like that as well. I think obviously there's still work and to be a more well-rounded player. But I think, there's a lot to work with Zach Kuntz. And I think, this like, like you said, if they draft a guy early and a guy late, I would, I'll be happy with Zach Kuntz in like, I don't know, the 4th or 5th round. I wouldn't want to go much higher than that. But yeah, I did like him as a later round guy.
And he's interesting because he started his career at Penn State, and they've done usually a pretty good job of, Gesicki, we talked about him earlier, maybe he hasn't lived to the potential that he had, but they've usually done a pretty good job with some of the guys they've had in that position group. So it's been interesting to kind of see him go from there to there. But yeah, Kuntz is a guy who I'm not going to give away all the player comps, but we have him compared to Kobe Fleener. And I know in the past, the Packers were connected to him as a free agent. They liked him going into that draft class as well. So that could be somebody that they're interested in. And if they pick him in the 4th round, those are the guys that we usually pick that are good after we bomb the 3rd round pick. So he'll be the guy that gets to be good then. So that part will be pretty nice.
And yeah, he's definitely going to have the stigma of the small school. I mean, look at, it's Old Dominion. So, but I think he could be somebody who could come in just from talent wise, he's got the ability to become something. So, he definitely could be a project to come in and take it in the later rounds.
Well, on the small school thing, to me, it's just like, who cares? Like, I mean, if you could find the traits, again, Christian Watson is a guy that, and I kind of even fell for that banana in the tailpipe last year with him. Some of my dislike for him was he a product of playing against the 3 of us kind of thing? Not necessarily. Dallas Goedert, I just mentioned him earlier. He played in the same level of football. So the traits are there. And I'm not saying they got to use a 1st round pick on him, but if they can get him in the 4th round, 5th round, like Nick was suggesting, that's definitely worth a flyer. And not only that, at that size, if nothing else, as a rookie, he can be help in the red zone where the Packers were just putrid for the last really 2 seasons. Even in 2021, they weren't that good in the red zone either. So really it's been and granted, after 2020, there was nowhere to go but down because they were the best red zone offense damn near ever. But
yeah.
The small school stuff, I just whatever. The Packers need playmakers in that room. They've got guys that they need to add to a bunch of different roles. You want to talk about some guys you can add on day 3. These are kind of the couple guys you have listed on here and a couple guys I want to bring up. Davis Allen, that's another like freakazoid type player that Green Bay could try and bring in. 6'6", 250 pounds. He was from Georgia, but he ended up going to Clemson. So that part's interesting. He's got that size ability to high point the ball. So again, that's another red zone type threat earlier in his career as he tries to overrun some things. Josh Weil is a guy, we talked about him kind of at the top as a potential DeGuara replacement. He's kind of been on the radar for a little while too, because it feels like he's played for so many years. I believe he was playing and getting like legitimate snaps for that Cincinnati team that played in the college football playoff with Fickle and Ritter and all those guys a couple of years ago. I would have to go back and look 100% to be sure on that, but that's a guy who's been around for a while. And then the other guy, if I'm going to let Joe talk about Sam Laporta, I'm going to talk about Luke Schoonmaker. Schoonmaker is an older player, which I think is going to push him towards not only that he's an older player, but I think there's just a ceiling that he doesn't necessarily have. But he's played in a pro style offense. He's played in an offense that they called it Smash Fest, guys. It was line up and we're going to slam your face into the dirt type thing. So from a blocking standpoint, he's capable of doing that. They asked him to block pass rushers. They asked him to block and get to the second level and block linebackers. But the other thing about Schoonmaker that's nice is he does have that ability to make plays down the field. He's not a one-dimensional player. Michigan just had their pro day today. He improved on his athleticism numbers. His athleticism score, I think, went up to like 9.4 or something like that.
9.85 is what I got wrote down here.
There you go. Even better for those of you that are really into stuff like that. So there's an upside there for Schoonmaker. He's a day 3 pick, in my opinion, 6'6", but he's an older player because he had that extra year with COVID eligibility and all. The age thing I think is something that we have to be a little more willing to maybe look past than we have in recent years, just because with these COVID years, there's like Stetson Bennett's 35 years old and he's in the draft this year for the first time. So that's just one example of others. But Schoonmaker's a guy who, if you told me before the draft that Green Bay signed a free agent, and maybe that just means bring back Mercedes Lewis, that's fine if that's the way it ends up being. But Green Bay signs a free agent. They drafted Sam Laporta in the 2nd round, and they drafted Luke Schoonmaker in the 5th round. I'd be like, that tight end room is going to be really good in a couple years because Laporta and Schoonmaker are both guys that can kind of do it all. And I do wonder if Green Bay will value that a little bit more than maybe somebody that's just a big slot type player. Like I said, they could use both. I think they can use both of those things. But I do wonder, in 2025, when Jordan Love's winning the league MVP with 2 tight end sets with Laporta and Schoonmaker having reached their ceiling, I think that'd be really good. And like I said, both of those guys can block. So that's something that Green Bay has valued a lot at that position. That's why, when they had, for example, Jay Sternberger coming in as that would have been the COVID season 2020, and Robert Tonyan became the starter that year. And it was because Tonyan was a better blocker than Sternberger ended up being. That was part of it. So, if you don't block, well, that was the year Jace got drafted, but Tonyan became the starter that I'm thinking of. Because if you guys remember that 2019 championship game against San Francisco, Jace catches that touchdown, and then all of us kept sharing that clip over and over and over again about man, this is the next guy. This guy right here, he's the next guy. This is going to be the guy that helps us with all that stuff at that tight end position. And then it just didn't work out. Tonyan became the starter the next year, and that was part of it. Tonyan was a better blocker, had his sea legs underneath him a little more than Jace did at that point. But I think those are 2 guys, again, both of them, when I talked about Laporta and then Schoonmaker too, they played in offenses that were heavy on running the ball. So they were asked to block a lot, and they did well with it. That was Michigan's best blocking tight end last year was Schoonmaker, and they got quite a few. They had quite a few coming into the year. Schoonmaker was one. Eric All is going to play at Iowa this year. He's going to be a draft pick this time next year. And then Colston Loveland's a freshman who became one of their best players down the stretch. He was their starting tight end, but Schoonmaker was one of their best players. And I think, again, early day 3, like if Green Bay loves getting into that position where they have like the first pick of the 4th round. I don't know what they love about that pick so much. It is kind of funny though how many times they've ended up with it. Like if he was that guy they took with the first pick of the 4th round, I'd be like, yeah, that makes sense. And that's a guy that, you know, you just kind of plug him into your offense. He'll play special teams and he'll do whatever it is that you guys need to do. And again, when you come from certain guys, you know, they come from certain programs and stuff, you know, they're well coached. And Jim Harbaugh obviously has that NFL pedigree from having been in the league in the past too. So I'll shut up.
No,
Well,
awesome.
you know,
Love it.
that's their way of breaking the 3rd round curse, is by taking the very first pick of the next round. So, you know, that's their way of compensating for that third round pick. But, you know, I got to say this. It hurts my heart having to talk about this kid, because I had to watch the Iowa-Michigan game just to see him. But I did, and I I did like Schoonmaker, and that hurts the mouth and the tongue and everything else having to say that. But, you know, I think Jacob said that he thought Meyer was the best blocker out of the tight
Of the
ends.
top guys, he is. Yeah.
Yeah,
Of the top guys, I
I
think he is.
I think Schoonmaker was probably the best blocker that I watched out of all the guys that I watched, just because he had the sound technique, he had the ability to do it. It just, he wasn't missing on very many blocks that I saw. He was that blocker you needed. And like Jacob said, you know, he's coming from a school that were just like Iowa. They're taught to be all around tight ends. You're going to be a receiver. You're going to be a blocker. You're going to be whatever we need you to be. You know, I thought he had some good speed to him. His route running was pretty good. He did occasionally have a concentration drop, but, you know, that's an easy fix. The one thing that I saw that I really liked out of him was he had better pass rush moves than a lot of the pass rushers that I watched. I watched him do a shoulder dip, and he got past the DB that was on him like he was nothing. And I watched him do a swim move over another guy, and I was like, man, this guy's got better pass rush moves than half the defensive ends that I watched. So, I mean, he has the ability. And then there was one other play that I watched that I just I said, oh my god, I can't believe it, just because of the athleticism out of him. It was against Iowa, and they had him coming in for a block, and he stuck his foot in the ground and spun like 360 around and went the other way, you know, or 180 or whatever you want to call it. But he spun basically all the way around and went the other way and made the block. And it just, I was like, wow, because he spun like a basketball player. And it was just an amazing thing to see, because you don't see that out of a lot of tight ends. You might see it out of a running back. You might see it out of a wide receiver, just that pivot and move. And so I really liked what I saw out of him. So even though it hurts me to say that I like a Michigan guy, I thought he was pretty good.
That'd be the reigning back-to-back Big Ten champion Michigan Wolverines there, Joe. Just
Hey, we're all going to be in trouble if Fickle hits at Wisconsin, and I hate saying that one too.
fine.
But
I mean, that's not meant to be disrespectful. Wisconsin's a really good program, but like there's tiers, and it's still, and even with the way the last 2 years have gone, it's the Buckeyes, and then work your way from there.
But I've got a couple others that aren't on our list and that I did watch that are probably going to be your later round guys. One of them is a Penn State guy, Brenton Strange.
Yep.
You know, if you go off his RAS, he had an 8.93. He had solid blocking ability. I thought he was quicker than what he was timed at his 40. I think he ran like a 4.7 40, and it looked like he was a little bit more explosive on the field. Routes looked pretty good. Size seemed pretty good, but he didn't have a ton of production at Penn State. And one of my notes says I thought maybe he could be a faster Richard Rodgers, because it looked like him in my mind, but
So
he had more speed than Richard Rodgers.
So he runs a 5.9 40.
Well, when you look up his 40 time, the guy Rodgers ran like a 4.87
Can
and
I tell you
Strange
guys a
ran
Richard
like a
Rodgers story?
4.7. Go for it.
Can I tell? Okay, so when Richard Rodgers got drafted, I was an intern at Packer Report, and I was helping cover that draft at the time. So Bill Huber was the guy who ran Packer Report at the time. And so that year it would have been Green Bay took HaHa Clinton Dix at 21, and then they took Devontae on day 2. I'm trying to remember. Yeah, that was a Thursday, Friday, Saturday deal. So they took Devontae on day 2. Well, then they got to the third round, and they took Richard Rodgers. And somebody, and I won't name names in the interest of being professional, basically it was like, who the hell is that? And then we kind of went through everything, and then he starts going through his list and goes, what did they do? Just like decide they were picking a tight end in the third round and start crossing all the guys off as they got taken? I was like, well, this is the guy who's left. So they took him. So that's my Richard Rodgers story. And then it was funny because if you guys remember that for his first preseason, he just looked the part. Like he caught a slant from Rodgers and ran like 40 yards after the catch. And I was like, oh my God, this guy's going to be really good. And then he was again, he had a couple nice moments in Green Bay, but yeah, it was never going to be this is our best tight
Like
end.
you mentioned about somebody else, he looked like he was running in quicksand because he just had no speed to him. And I think that's what saved us on the Hail Mary against Detroit was nobody expected him to be down in the end zone, and he ended up in the end zone.
No, it took him the longest to get down there.
But I've got one more I've got 2 more listed, but I got one more that I want to talk about because he could be kind of a surprise guy, and that's Kyle Patterson out of Air Force. And, not a lot of the military school guys are drafted just because of I don't know if they've changed the rule this year or what, but it was before they couldn't play until they finished their service time. But I think they changed it this year though, or they changed it last year or something. But this guy, he's on the bigger side for a tight end. He's a pretty good blocker. He wasn't much of a burner, and of course he lacked a lot of college production because, the Air Force runs their triple option or quadruple option or whatever they're running this week. But I thought he looked the size, and I thought he had the ability, and I think, maybe as a 7th rounder, a preferred UDFA, he might be something to take a look at.
Yeah, interesting. I didn't get take a look at him actually.
You probably won't find a lot on him. I found one video on him, and then when I went to look at like his stats, he had like 1 catch.
It sounds like an elite tight end prospect.
Hey, Dawson Knox didn't have a ton of production, but he was a hell of an athlete coming out.
And I loved him.
That was definitely well. He also played in an offense that was like, and that offense had, I think that was like what, DK and who's the other guy? AJ Brown and Elijah Moore. Yeah. All those dudes were top, all those dudes, 1st or 2nd round picks. And he was also there. And I think Shea Patterson was there, and then Jordan Ta'amu was the quarterback that came after him too. So some interesting names that Knox played with, but didn't have.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, going off Patterson's statistics from ESPN, he had 3 receptions, 32 yards, and no touchdowns for the season.
Yeah. But he knows how to block because, like you said, he played triple option. So you can't play triple option at tight end and not get in the way of somebody.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, and he looks the part. I mean, some of those guys, you look at him and are like, okay, well, he might be undersized or whatever, but he looked like a bigger tight end. And like I said, it's more of a project type, but I could see him being 6th, 7th round or even a preferred UDFA. And then you got other guys from there's Princeton Fant from Tennessee, and Ohio State's probably going to pop a tight end out somewhere. And
their tight end went back to school. That was Cade Stover. A lot of people really liked him, but he ended up going back to school.
But is there anybody else you guys got on your list that you'd want to talk about?
I'm all done.
I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted with my stuff.
So every episode we've had in the draft preview, I've always asked our guests this. You don't have to give an explanation, no nothing. But out of all the guys that we've talked about tonight, one of them ends up in Green Bay. Who is your guy that's going to end up in Green Bay?
Sam Laporta. Like I said, they've watched him. They went and watched him a bunch in Iowa. And again, maybe we'll find out down the road that they really were just watching like Lucas Van Ness or somebody else. But again, I think day 2 tight end is certainly, and like, who was it? I was joking with, I think it was Ross Uglum was joking with me the other day. Green Bay could end up with like an all Iowa draft. Lucas Van Ness, Sam Laporta, Jack Campbell, Riley Moss, and then just be like, yeah, cool.
Kayvon Merriweather.
That would actually, sure, yeah, and that would be a really good draft if they ended up that way. Obviously, that's probably not the way that's going to pan out, but I think Laporta is a guy that they're really going to. Laporta is a guy who's like the perfect mix of the things they typically like in a tight end. He's athletic. He's more athletic than the guys they have typically liked in the past. They're not, in my opinion, going to have to spend a first-round pick on him either. So I think, again, that honeypot is going to be that 45th pick, and he's the guy who I don't know if Michael Mayer is going to be available in a spot like that. Dalton Kincaid, kind of the same thing. But I think we talked about Washington earlier. Maybe that's a spot, but I think Laporta is a better player than him anyways. So, but yeah, that's the guy I think is going to be it. And I think that would be a really good pick for Green Bay there in the second round. So yeah, Laporta is my pick.
Yeah.
What about you, Nick?
Yeah, I think it's really funny because, theoretically the Matt LaFleur thing, they should be looking for like a lot of more like blocking tight ends, but the whole good era, they really haven't chased after those like big blocking dudes. They've actually gone after the big receivers. I mean, Jimmy Graham, Sternberger, even the guy like Tyler Davis, who's been hanging around for a bit. Like,
to be fair, they signed Jimmy when McCarthy was still here, so that might have had something to do with that.
Well, that's true. Rodgers had something to do with that too, because Rodgers, begged for Jimmy.
Helped recruit, yeah.
But still, I think they've had Mercedes as like the one who's the inline blocker, and they haven't really been looking for guys who can just block. So I do lean towards like a receiving weapon, especially with Tunyon gone. I think I'm right with you there, Jacob. It's going to be Laporta, I think, and if not Laporta, then I'll go Tucker Kraft out of South Dakota.
It'll be a lot of fun. I think day 2 of the draft this year is going to be like really fun to dig into, just because I think, and it normally is, honestly, it's one of my favorite days every year because it's like there's always so many good players that are still left on those days, and Green Bay is going to pick twice in theory instead of just the one time that they could pick in the first round.
Yeah.
And with the Rodgers trade, we don't know what picks we're going to get back out of it. So I mean, the day 2 and 3 could be our busiest.
Well, they have like 100 picks on day 3 this year, anyways. Like they have 5 or 6. Granted, I will. That'll be one of those. I'll have my notifications on my phone, and they'll be like, "Oh, Green Bay took Jake Moody, kicker from Michigan," just to throw a name out there, and I'll be like, "Cool." Like I'm not watching the 7th round of the draft. Like,
yeah.
With all due respect to those guys, they deserve all the respect in the world, but I ain't getting paid to watch it, so I'll get who Green Bay picked, and then I'll do my stuff from there.
I'll probably be at work, so that's the only thing I'll be able to do is pay attention to the late round picks.
Sorry. Go ahead, Nick. I was just going to make a smart ass joke, so it's all yours.
Go ahead. Jeff probably deserves it anyway.
You.
I was just going to ask, what's your one, Joe?
Laporta, I'm on board with it. Obviously, from the Hawkeye perspective.
Sorry.
If not, if I wanted to be different and didn't want to pick Laporta, I would have to go with Schoonmaker just because I liked what I saw out of him. But that's going to be a later round pick. But I mean, it's about time they take a friggin' Iowa tight end after all these years.
Now, I do know this too, and I don't know if they would have taken him anyways, but they did a ton of homework on TJ Hawkinson.
Yeah, I know they did.
But I do believe they would have taken Rashawn Gary if he was there. Like, I believe that story when Mike Smith, because Mike Smith is not a bullshitter. So when he says something, you're not like, oh, he's exaggerating for like his guy or whatever. Like he'll tell you how he feels kind of thing. When he says he had Rashawn rated number 1 and that was a year that included Nick Bosa. Said he had Gary ranked number 1. Like, man, I think that was a guy that, like, if you guys remember, there was that comeback against the Jets where everybody was, oddly enough, against the Jets, where everybody was like, oh, tanking for draft position versus did winning that game matter? And like the difference would have been they got the 8th pick. And like all these years removed now, I think the only difference would have been that they would have just taken Rashawn Gary at 8 instead of 12. Like, I think that's the only thing that would have changed. Granted, I can't prove
Most
that,
likely.
but I just sure feels that way. There are guys that you could tell. Like last year, they took Quay Walker, and I got a friend of mine who talked to a Packers scout, and I don't have he's a well-known Packers like draft person, but I can't give the name because I don't have the authorization for who that is. But he talked to a Packers scout, and the conversation was, quote, Quay all the way. Like, I think they would have taken Quay Walker at like 15 or something like that. Like, they loved Quay Walker. And I'm interested to see on him when you guys have me back, assuming I'm invited. So for like season previews and stuff like that, that's going to be one of them dudes that if his maturity level has grown, because really on the field, he got better on the field as the season ended. He just had what my father
Mental
used
mistakes.
to call dumbass attacks, is what my dad used to call them. Stop pushing people that are not in uniform. Like, if we can clean that up, then I'm telling you, like, I don't remember who you were talking about earlier, but you compared, was it Darnell Washington that you compared to Quay Walker, where like all the tools are there and like they just need to mold him? Well, Quay is one of them dudes, man. All the tools are there. And like, if they can harness that, next year could be a huge year for him. And you started to see that again, down the stretch. The last couple of days, I've been doing the goodbye to Aaron Rodgers thing. So I've been watching highlights of like even some of the 2022 stuff. And like the Titans game, he had that big stuff on Derrick Henry. He had a couple plays against the Rams, had a play against the Eagles. He might've scored a touchdown. Like, I think Quay is this isn't the Quay Walker show, so I probably shouldn't be doing this, but I'm really excited. I'm really excited to see his development because, again, typically if the Packers really love a prospect, they can't Jordan Love maybe, but like if they've really loved a guy and like targeted and acquired him, Christian Watson was another guy like that. They loved him, they moved up and they got him, and that paid off for the end of his rookie season. Quay Walker's a guy that I think could certainly be something like that as well.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a front office that like they definitely zone in on their guys. Like when they want someone, they just like get tunnel vision and they just go straight for it. And
well, I think something that I'm going to butcher this guy's name, so I do apologize because I've never heard him actually pronounce it. But Siddharth Mahesh, and again, might be butchering his name, but something he brought up earlier was how like Gutekunst's draft philosophy for the most part has been target the strengths of the draft class instead of like needs and players. So like they were like, oh, could he potentially, like the safety class, in my opinion, stinks. And it doesn't necessarily fit like with the Packers. Like, you want to talk about athleticism. This is not a very athletic group on the safety side of things. So he's targeted the strengths of the draft class. So like if they ended up, like if you told me, hey, the Jets gave him pick 13, so 13 and 15 turns out to be 2 of a offensive lineman, edge rusher, tight end, I'd be like, yeah, that doesn't surprise me. The Packers typically last year, good linebacker class, good defensive line class. They took Quay Walker. They took Devontae Wyatt. They drafted 3 receivers in a pretty good receiver class. The only like rebuttal to his point is in 2020 when they took Jordan Love and AJ Dillon and all of them, was that receiver class was really, really good, and they didn't draft one at all. Famously, apparently, is the way it goes now. But I'll just be interested to see like how that tracks this year for what the perceived strengths of the class are. Like, I think Green Bay's taking a corner, maybe 2. And I will not be surprised if like Rasul Douglas is one of their starting safeties. And I don't necessarily love the idea of changing positions like that because this isn't Madden, but the Packers are at a spot now where they almost have to take a risk at a position like safety because there aren't, unless they want to sign Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, which for some reason doesn't have a job yet. He must be asking for like $100 million. I don't understand how he's still available, but they're not going to be able to add like this high mark. Kevin Byard. They're just not going to be able to add. They're not going to be able to add a high marquee player with the way everything's going on. So I don't know, or maybe they get back Jordan Whitehead in a Rodgers trade or something. But those are the kind of risks I think they have to find and be able to take, because the draft class, like before the combine, it was funny. It's kind of funny to track something you guys can track. What is the consensus? What do all of Packers media and then like the fans and stuff, what are they saying they really love? Well, a lot of people were in on Brian Branch, and I was kind of on this island of like, he's not a safety. He just kind of plays slot and moves around a little bit. And I don't know, like he's a good football player, but I'm like, I don't think he's a top 15 player. And then he goes to the combine and basically bombs. And everyone's like, oh, never mind. Like, it's just kind of funny to track how that works. You know, one person says, I really like this guy. The example I keep using is the year they took Rashawn. That year, everybody after the combine had basically decided, or before the combine, because after Ja'Kai Polite got booted. But they're like, I really like Ja'Kai Polite and Dalton Reisner. I think that would be an ideal draft. And then everybody was saying that. I was like, how do all of you have that same exact opinion? Like, maybe you do, but like, how does that work? It's just funny to me how like tracking those trends of what is the consensus. And now Branch is kind of off the radar from that standpoint, which, you know, again, Branch is a guy who, like, if he's available at 45, sure. But I couldn't take him at 15 before the combine. And now with the way all that's worked out too, there's just the upside's so limited with him too.
Copy and paste media, my man. Copy and paste media. Let's just copy whatever everybody else says and call it our own.
I think it's basically guaranteed that the Packers are just going to do some random, inexplicable, bizarre shit like they did last year anyway. So trying to predict it is pretty much a fool's errand at this point.
The Packers always have, even through Ted Thompson and that. It was always a surprise what they would do in the draft. That's why I think I enjoyed watching Packer drafts, because you never know what was going to happen. You could predict here or there what was going to happen based on who was falling and all that, but for the most part, you know, what's the joke with Ted Thompson? It was always, he's scouting some Joe Blow from D4, you know, Montana Community College, instead of being at Ohio State or something like that. So they've always made some off-the-wall picks that seem to work for them in a way, but, you know, it's a draft. You know, they get paid millions of dollars to pick these players. We get paid nothing to judge them about it.
Well, and the other thing I'll say on that note is, remember too, what is considered off the wall is considered off the wall by guys like us. And I think something else you'll notice is if you follow like teams from, or people from other teams' fan bases, is a lot of people's mock drafts have like the same 30 or 40 players in them. And it's just like, there's 400 or 500 players, including college free agents. And not only that, there are guys that, like, we've talked about this before. There's guys that Green Bay will, like, people have like consensus that they should really like this dude. And it's just like, well, they won't because, or they don't, or haven't because he's too short or too slow, you know, whatever it is that they have for their athletic thresholds. So yeah, I don't like to be that they won't pick that guy. And especially after last year, because last year, you know, the point was they'll never take an off-ball linebacker in the first round and they don't like old prospects. Well, then they had 2 first-round picks and took both of them. So I'll never say like they won't do it, but it seems unlikely based on trends that, you know, they don't like short receivers. They don't like short cornerbacks. They had to bend a little bit. I think Gutekunst said afterwards that Jair was like right on the line for their thing, but I think they bent a little bit. They bent a little bit for Randall Cobb. I know that too, or we know that too. Like they talked about that after they picked him once upon a time. So I'm interested. It's going to be a lot of fun. Like I said, I think the draft is going to be just like this welcome sight because we've spent like draft night in 2021 was not any fun. Like it just wasn't, you know, when you go through the whole Rodgers doesn't want to be here thing, blah, 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 blah. And then last year it was just all about how they didn't pick a receiver and that'll happen again this year. And just, I don't know. I just think that's just such dumb discourse because Green Bay's done so well until obviously recently, but their second round draft pedigree for receivers cannot be questioned. So I don't understand the idea that like they had to pick this dude and it just had to. And not only that, this year's receiver class, how many receivers are worth a first round pick? I don't know if there's any. Like, well, I take that back. Jackson Smith-Njigba was worth a first round pick, but I don't think he's a top 13 or 15 player, which is where Green Bay will theoretically be picking.
There
So
might be
I'll be
some
interested to
guys
see how they
that
go.
float in, but yeah, I don't think there's many of them that
Jalen
are
Hyatt,
worth it.
that's the guy that I don't think I know. Like Justice Mosqueda reported that he was told
Yeah.
the combine. They view him in the same ilk as they do, or they did Chris Olave. So that might be one of those off the wall. Really? They took him at, like, they traded back from 15 to 21 and took him there. Like, that would not
Yeah.
surprise me if that happens at all.
Yeah, that is like the perfect what the fuck Packers pick because it's just so out of left field. And because like I remember reading that. Yeah, I remember reading that report as well on his like little mock draft thing. I'm like, oh, could you imagine the reaction? Yeah, it'd be funny. It'd be hilarious.
Well, and
Hey,
I've
man, if they
said
take
for a while that I think it would be poetic justice that we get a first round pick from New York for Rodgers, and we immediately turn around and use that first round pick on a wide receiver.
Oh yeah,
I have heard from, like, stories that were told about the Favre pick, like when they traded Favre and went from there, that Ted Thompson wanted to trade that pick because he didn't want that guy to be known as the dude that we got for Favre. So it would not surprise me if the Jets give us 13 and Green Bay like trades up with something else so they can be like, hey, or trades back, or whatever it is that they do with that pick, just to make it seem like, hey, we traded Rodgers and we got Lucas Van Ness, and he didn't work out, so you're a bum. Kind of, that's just unfair
Right,
pressure.
yeah.
And one thing I do appreciate about the Packers is, despite this thought that they treat these players like crap, is they do think about and seem to care about things like that, where, like, they don't want that unfair pressure put on a guy.
Mm-hmm. I can probably start to wrap it up here then.
Yeah, what do you think? We probably should let Jacob get out of here because we've been talking for a long time now.
So, guys, as Jacob mentioned earlier, you can find the Game On Draft Guide on his Twitter. It's the pinned tweet. I'll put a link up when we post the episode as well, and in the bio on Spotify and Stitcher, blah blah blah, wherever we post it. But for now, as always, you can find us on Twitter. Jacob at Jacob Westendorf, obviously. Myself at Nicholas GRGR. Joe at Iowa_Joe86. The podcast at Outback_Packers. Until next time, we'll see you later.